Hi there folks, this is Lewis here for ProPokerHUDs.com. In this video, I'm going to show you what is, at least in my opinion, truly an innovation in heads-up display technology. I've been using different HUD options since I began playing, and I can say without doubt that the custom HUD features that ProPokerHUDs make are far beyond anything I've ever seen. I've been, I suppose you could say, an enthusiast of HUD for a long time. I've learned how to make custom stats, how to design them efficiently, and they have blown all of that out of the water and more. It's not even a competition. I'm a player whose game focuses largely on using the HUD as profitably as possible, of course. So any edge I can gain by improving it is huge for me. The ProPokerHUDs products have directly helped my game in that respect. I've been playing for 5 years, professionally for about 2. Recently, I've been playing mostly 1-2 games. I'm also a coach at PokerVIP.com, where I produce videos and written content. So, let's get into business. Here, I shall bring up the hand history. We shall show you an example of a heat map. You can see not only are they amazingly functional, but they also look pretty cool, which is always a bonus, you know. Currently, when you download the heat map packs, PokerPros give you access to 5 different heat maps. You can see here we've got a 3-bet one, and then they're all arranged by position. You get a 3-bet versus one, which is useful for defending versus steals. You get 3-bet versus small blind open, so small blind v big blind. And then you get call 3-bet range, which is very useful in determining people's defending ranges, and a race first in one, which I find invaluable. I can't live without that one anymore. Use it every day. So, let's have a look at how we can use these. Basically, heat maps are a great representation of data in poker, mostly because heat maps show both distribution and frequency, and this is very important, because when you consider a range like raise first in 14, for example, it shows you, you have an idea of the distribution of range, but you don't have any real idea of the frequency with which someone is raising each individual hand, I should say. You can see in each heat map that, the hand in this instance are color coded. So, any hand in grey has never been to showdown after making the relevant action. So in this instance, raise first in. No hand in grey in this heat map has ever been shown down after being raised first in. This is a very useful idea because it allows us to see the hands that our opponents are willing to play first of all. The colours are also very important because the colours denote frequency. So tending from yellow to red, frequency tends from low to high. So we can see in this example, Villa most frequently raises first in with 9-9 to aces and ace-king, because these are the darkest red colours here. We then see that he raises less frequently with these smaller pocket pairs here and the Broadway hands. You see that he's interestingly left out some Broadway hands in his early position range here, the weaker ones. And then less again these light yellow hands here, which he raises the least frequently of all, the suited aces and some one gap hands. This is just one example, of course, but it instantly tells us so much more than Villain's raise first in does. It shows us his hand distribution and gives a visual way to express it, which is really, really useful. It saves you so much time for just first of all. Personally, I find this pretty invaluable as it allows me to make much more specific reads, as my understanding of the hand distribution of my opponents is now much more defined than it would otherwise be. Let's now take a moment to look at how the heat maps can be used to determine information that we would otherwise not see from our opponent's stats in different situations. Here we see an example of 2 players with the same total raise first in stat of 27%. When we compare the heat maps of each player's range for each stat, we see some substantial differences in range and distribution. The player on the left is raising a more linear range, a small distribution of hands, with each hand being raised with a higher frequency. In contrast, the player on the right is a very divergent range, raising a much wider range of hands, but each hand individually with less frequency. This immediately allows us to create a more effective strategy to counter each opponent. The player on the left, we want to play a tighter range than the player on the right. We prefer to do so post-flop because their range is easier to predict and play backhand in this situation. The player on the right has a more possible hands that they could be playing as post-flop, and so instead of trying to outplay them there, we want to often 3-bet pre-flop and use with a wider range. He will be forced to fold many of the speculative hands we can see in his range. Moving on to the 3-bet heat maps, we have a similar example. Here, both players have the same total 3-bet at 7%, and again, the heat maps vary drastically, providing us information we otherwise would not have. In this instance, the player on the left clearly has a 3-bet bluffing range, while the player on the right has a much more value-oriented 3-bet range. Using information from the heat maps, our response to each is relatively simple in both cases. We have to have a wider calling and light 4-betting range versus the villain on the left, and play more conservatively versus the villain on the right. One final example for the call 3-bet heat maps. This example, we again have two players with the same total call 3-bet stat of 30%. This time, it is interesting how effective the color coding system is to the denotes frequency it can be in this situation. We see that the player on the left is most often calling 3-bets with ace king offsuit, ace queen offsuit, ace jack offsuit, and pocket jacks, and the other villain is almost always flattening queen queen and jack jack to 3-bets. This information allows us to be much more accurate in forming our opponent's ranges in 3-bet pots, and allows us to play much more effectively thereas. Okay, so let's have a look at the applications of the heat maps in the games. And we shall move this hand back to the start, and now we will watch villain opens 3x front of the gun. We see from his race racing stat that he is opening 21% from this position. We can immediately just consult the race racing heat map to get an idea of his range. So we just click on here, open up, to get an idea of his hand distribution by looking at this, that his range consists of. So we take a look at this, we think about it for a moment, but we don't have to memorize it because we can always just come back and assess it again. It's just one of the beauties of the system. Middle position folds, cut off folds, and it gets the hero. So, whether you prefer an optimal or exploitative approach, understanding our opponent's range in this level of detail only helps us make better decisions. Hero chooses to call, and this is based on villain's range both containing large enough proportion of weaker hands and opening with high enough frequency to make calling preferable to 3-betting. So we do this by just consulting his range, considering it, and then thinking, well, since we can see the villain is calling 24% of 3-bets, which we can see by opening, and we can even look it up by looking at the heat map here, we can see the distribution. We will be better, well, we're going to get fold, or 4-bet, sorry, approximately 3/4 of the time. And so, calling ace jack is going to be much higher EV than 3-betting it, versus this player's opening range, again, which we can just look at by opening the race first in heat map. So, we choose to call, as hero, small blind chooses to fold, and villain 1 squeezes it up to 11. So now we can consult villain 1's 2-bet range from the big blind, which we will do like this, 3-bet big blind, and we see this distribution here. We see that villain will be 3-betting his premiums here almost all the time, but also that he has the capability to squeeze light here to steal the dead money. If you wanted a heat map that represents this exact situation, so big blind 3-bet versus EP open multi-way, the guys at ProPokerHUDs could actually make you a custom heat map for that exact situation, so the sky's the limit, really. So back to the hand now. Villain 2 chooses to call, and we're going to look at his call 3-bet heat maps to get a better idea of his hand distribution. Opening up the heat map, we see that he's calling this spot with 9-9 to jack-jack, also some queen-jack, possibly also connected suited aces, and maybe some lower pocket pairs here, 8s and 7s. But it appears villain 2 would be 4-betting queen queen plus and ace king, which is something we wouldn't know if all the info we had was villain 2's call 3-bet of 24, which is in this situation. And this heat map just gives us much more specific information and allows us to make much more specific decisions than we would otherwise have access to. So hero now is put in a little bit of a difficult situation, but he's now getting 3-1, and with what we found out from the heat maps, we can certainly justify this call. So hero makes the call, ace king 7 on the flop, rainbow, and villain 1 checks the initiative. With 2 callers and considering the position and pot size, we don't really expect villain 1 to be going for a check raise here. Blocking the ace-6 hands in his range as well makes us feel more confident that villain 1's giving up a lot. The king obviously blocking ace-king for the board, so villain 2 chooses to bet almost 50% of the pot. And now we need to consider our conclusions about his pre-flop range. We decided that based on our heat map, villain 2 actually doesn't have much scope to hold a strong ace-6 hand here, and doesn't appear to have ace-king, maybe has ace-queen sometimes. 7-7 remains a possibility as well. We don't expect villain to bet his suited connecting ace-x hands, as he won't expect value from much worse on this board texture. His position is also not great since he's sandwiched. We don't expect him to be able to check, well, he won't expect to be able to check pocket pairs and show them down with a win very often in a sandwich spot. So there's a possibility that he might actually start turning some hands into bluffs right now. He wishes to call, based on this assumption that there are a fair number of hands being turned into bluff in villain's range. If it's pocket pairs that can check, that can check when they're in a position, as well as gut shot draws, queen jack, jack 10 hands. He chooses to make the call. He's getting 3-1 on a call here, so reasonable enough to make that call. Turn is a queen of diamonds, which makes the board 4-tone and also blocks ace queen again, so with ace jack also blocking the other ace, it's getting much less likely. So villain 2 chooses to jam for a slight overbet. Villain's value range kind of only seems to be, kind of only reps 7-7 or turned queens. He's turning into a bluff on the flop, but we already eliminated pocket queens and ace king from his range based on the preflop distribution, which we saw from the heat map. So yeah, it becomes a pretty interesting situation based on, well, jack 10 is another possible option, but since hero holds a jack blocker, this reduces the chance of villain actually having jack 10. Villain's bet sizing also doesn't seem conducive with trying to get value from his whole range here, certainly, so it seems to deviate from what he'd normally do in this spot if he really held a premium hand. Basically, Hero concludes, given all this information, that he beats enough of Villain's range to profitably claw here. And when we consult the heat map again, it becomes fairly obvious that Villain isn't going to show down a hand much stronger than us often here. And so, with the odds he's getting here, 2-1 almost, Hero chooses to make the call. 4 on the river, and Villain 2 turns over tens. So, turns tens into a bluff on the flop. Not the exact hand we'd imagine, but if we go back for a moment, and consider, and if we look at this, you see 10-10 was actually a part of his calling range here, according to the heat map. Obviously, this won't be accurate all the time, of course, but in this instance, we can see that it indeed was. The heat maps, if used correctly, are exceedingly valuable. Of course, they can't help you in every possible situation, but what they do offer is information that other people aren't using, and I mean, if you can get that, that's a meaningful edge in my book. The price of these things is negligible, considering the advantage that they can give you. I mean, you're talking like $50, $25, something like that. It's really nothing. So yeah, I'm a big fan. Hopefully you'll be a big fan as well. Try them out yourselves, yeah? Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure you check out these CMAX at ProPokerHUDs.com, and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.